If you can say this is the meat which tastes amazing, it's half the price, and it helps you live forever, well then I think people will be pretty quick to flock. I think we will nail taste, and potentially they already have nailed taste. I think the problem is going to be texture.
You've explained what cultivated meats are really succinctly, brilliant, but you said science fiction. And it all does sound like pretty out there.
We could become a world of vegans while we're all still eating meat. We will see the best meat out there coming from the cultivated section. You know, I've heard people online talking about the dream of the bodyboard sized steak, because when you have, limits of an animal no longer apply.
Welcome to In Good Taste, a podcast on food matters for food lovers. I'm Mallika Basu, a food writer, commentator, and advisor. Every week, we're going to bring you sharp, snackable episodes on what's shaping our food and drink today. It's going to be across cultures, kitchens, and continents. We're going to cover big issues to bite-sized trends, and it's all on the table. So joining me today is none other than Harry Kind. Hello, Harry.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Not at all. Now, Harry, you're a consumer affairs specialist, formerly of which, where you analyze lots of food safety labeling and also new food technologies. And you're going to take us through the promises and the pitfalls of cultivated meats. Is that right?
That's right, yeah, a really exciting bit of science fiction becoming fact.
Oh, I can't wait to hear more. What a brilliant soundbite to start with. So, will you start, Harry, by just explaining to us what on earth cultivated meats are and how do cells become steak, fish, and meat?
Yeah, I suppose it's worth starting with what is meat, right? So meat is a collection of animal cells, whether that's cow cells, chicken cells, fish cells, whatever. And it will be a collection usually of three main types. It'll be muscle, it'll be fat, and it'll be that kind of connective tissue. Not just gristle, but everything that makes a steak different from some mince, basically. All of those things are meat. And at the moment, we grow those cells by making a whole organism. You know, we have a sheep in a field, we feed it, we cultivate it that way, we give it grass, and then we harvest it. And actually, the cells that we want are quite a small part of the whole animal. And it's a very inefficient way, really, of getting the cells that we actually care about. So what cultivated meat says is that we should cut out the middleman of the animal. We should take one cell and we should grow that in basically, for want of a better word, lab conditions. And this is why it's sometimes called lab-grown meat. But it's in a way more like a brewery. You take a single cell, you multiply it multiple times, thousands, millions and millions of times. And you grow those cells, you feed them, you allow them to develop, and then you have the bits and pieces that you need. And then comes a tricky part where you put those bits of those cells together into a package. And the kind of the dream in all of this is you build a steak. At the moment, the really easier kind of beginner level cultivated meat is that you make a chicken nugget, and we're actually incredibly good at doing that. It costs a lot of
Hold on
money.
to that. Hold on to that for a minute, because we're going to come on to that. You've explained what cultivated meats are really succinctly, brilliant, but you said science fiction. And it all does sound like pretty out there. Can you explain to me why we're doing all of this? I mean, this is a very loaded question, I know. What's the
Yeah.
summary?
The biggest problem I think that we're trying to avoid with cultivated meats, well, I suppose there's two big problems, right? One is animal suffering. We know that we've had problems with battery chickens. We know that fishing can hurt the environment and impact biodiversity, and even the safest and the most kind of progressive of animal husbandry requires killing a chicken at the end of the day. And so avoiding that is a really kind of honorable goal that helps out people. Basically, we could become a world of vegans while we're all still eating meat. That's kind of push number one. But push number two, and I think this is really where there's some exciting progress, is the environmental side. And that's because raising a cow particularly costs a lot of resources. So agriculture contributes something like 30% of all carbon emissions. It also is responsible for a huge amount of water usage. And so maybe 15% of that is then meat growing. So not only do the cows release methane, but also you have to grow huge swathes of animal feed out there, potentially in rainforest environments, to feed the cows. Incredibly inefficient, incredibly bad for the environment. And the hope is if you do that in a factory rather than on a field, you can actually save the environment.
Mm, And that makes complete sense, doesn't it? I can't imagine farmers are very happy with this, especially livestock farmers.
No, and that's where you get into the iffy politics of all of this, that there are efforts throughout the world to try and push back on this. So Italy has banned the sale and import of cultivated meat. You have states in America that are trying to ban this or restrict it. And also, on the other side, it's a slow process to make this legal. And so there are some powerful lobby groups, farmers, for example, who are trying to defend not just their businesses, but an ancient way of life. Italian farmers been doing this for millennia and then suddenly could be out of a job. That is a problem. It's the same kind of complications that we've seen around, non-cultivated meat alternatives. For example, are we allowed to say that almond milk is milk? Are we allowed to call a vegetable sausage a sausage or a burger or a steak? Those are debates that happen. There's a lot of money flowing around, but ultimately, yes, farmers are the ones who could be losing out.
Sure, and that would make complete sense. Farmers are so integral to our culture and heritage. Of course, making cultivated meats doesn't have, it comes with some environmental impacts too, presumably. You've got the factory production, there's links to fossil fuels. So there's that angle as well to think about, isn't there?
That's right. So the stats that you see are something like there's a 90% reduction in carbon emissions for making cultivated meat compared to farmed meat. But those will always have an asterisk which says, assuming
Mhm.
renewable energy sources are used in the production. And so, in a few years' time, in a few decades, hopefully we will have switched to a world where all factories are run off renewable, zero carbon electricity. But in the meantime, some people suggest that these are actually worse for the environment. As we've said, though, this is early days, and so it's hard to tell once this is at scale how good this will be for the environment.
Well, that is a very balanced argument presented right there, Harry. I'm going to ask you where we're at now because I do know that it's been approved for use in pet food. So our furry friends they can enjoy a spot of cultivated meat. So where is it on our tables and plates?
That's right. I tried looking for this pet food. I think it's available in one store, one Pets at Home store in the UK somewhere. Um, and that is the first kind of legally, commercially available meat in the UK, just not for human consumption. In Singapore, this is legal. There are some movements in America making this more legal. It's a little bit more complicated with the states there. But there are suggestions that within 2 years we could be seeing commercially available cultivated meat for human consumption right here in the UK. It will likely be more expensive than regular farmed meat. But I think there are some very wealthy vegetarians out there who would pay top dollar to taste the taste of chicken that they remember from their childhood, which they've given up for ethical reasons. And if they have to pay, 10 times the price of a chicken nugget for an ethical chicken nugget, well, I think they could be the early adopters that fund the whole industry.
I think you might be onto something actually. If I went vegetarian, because I am well, formerly, I was a diehard carnivore, but I am trying to be better, Harry. Trust me. But, it does appeal to me. And as a special treat, I might fork out the money. But you do touch on a very important question, don't you? Which is the commerciality of these products. And we've seen that with old protein as well. This kind of triple 3 points of price, taste, convenience slash affordability, availability is quite a tricky balance to strike. And do we think that cultivated meats are going to go down a similar trajectory?
There will be challenges. My prediction, though, is that we will see the best meat out there coming from the cultivated section. I've heard people online talking about the dream of the bodyboard-sized steak. Because when you have lab-grown meat, the limits of an animal no longer apply. And so hopefully the taste side of things will actually be an easy win. There are people who've tried this. A gentleman in the Washington Post wrote up about one meat tasting like the chicken-est, the chicken-est chicken. He's the most chicken-est chicken he's ever
That
tasted.
that that is some kind of like massive tongue twister, right? Chicken is
Yes.
chicken. I love, but I see what he's saying.
You have this opportunity, right, to fine tune the real taste of meat. Grass fed beef versus corn fed. Well, maybe you can put that in the nutrient mixture where you grow the food. Maybe you can have some fried chicken which actually has as much omega-3 as a piece of salmon. Maybe you can have a salmon which doesn't quite taste as fishy but has all the benefits. We can fine tune this, and there will be endless opportunities, potentially a whole new branch of the culinary world dedicated to perfecting in the lab the perfect piece of meat.
Look, this is really splitting me. I don't know how it's splitting the audience and the listeners. So, guys, if you have any thoughts, send them over. Um, One part of me, Harry, is so excited about this. Like, I can't wait to try the beefiest steak that is produced and made in a lab. The other part of me is just internally screaming Frankenfood. Okay, and so I have a couple of questions here. Bear with me. One is, are we again creating more industry and corporate involvement in the way our food was traditionally produced? And that goes beyond farmers. There is lots of chat about, who holds power in our food and drink, how much money they make out of it, does it open us to certain abuses? I mean, we're still mislabeling bread for crying out loud. Forget about Franken food and like chicken-eest chicken made in labs. So that's my first question.
That's a good point. And when you have the extraordinary costs in not just developing this technology, the R&D, but also then scaling up to build a factory, to have the tanks that have to be sterilized clean in order to grow these meats, that's going to require a lot of investment. It's going to be big companies doing that, and the fear is that those companies are few and far between. They are controlled by a lot of people rather than a lot of family farms that are feeding into the industry. Now, I do part of me thinks, I'm very worried about that. But there's also an issue of, we know that the meat industry, particularly in America, is very concentrated. The meat packers are almost an oligopoly there. So we have those problems already. We know that farmers are exploited. My hope for cultivated meat is kind of comes from my optimism comes from the world of another cultivated food that we already consume up and down the country. And that is, well, two really, beer and Marmite. If you were to go into a brewery, it would look a whole lot like the facilities for making cultivated meat. And while there are massive alcohol companies that own, the big branded beers, there are also so many microbreweries, startups that make all sorts of slightly different beers. I really hope that the same could one day happen in meat, and so you have the local home brew almost of chicken that can take on the industry. That's
Oh,
my
that's a lovely.
view.
It's a simplistic view, but I think a lovely view and slightly calms my ruffled chicken feather, if I could say that. Um, what about, and I'm going to say this, right? Because I'm a cook at the end of the day and I write about food, but what on earth is it going to taste like? I mean, that's the other thing because, a lot of the alternative protein products, the manufactured ones, they just really fall flat on taste. I mean, there's some great ones now. But yeah, what about how it actually tastes? I mean, are we being realistic when we talk about chicken ears chicken and the beefiest beefsteaks?
I think we will nail taste, and potentially they already have nailed taste. I think the problem is going to be texture. I think it's very, it's a far easier to grow these cells as a soup than it is to string them together in scaffolding to make a steak. And if you like to be able to cut into a chicken breast just so and see the juices flow, that is a challenge for the scientists. It's a lot
Mm.
easier to make a meatball or a burger, which tastes great, but it doesn't matter what it kind of looks like inside, how it comes apart. That's easier. And so that's probably where I think we're going to see some slow progress.
And it's so important, isn't it, when you're cutting something, because you almost start eating the food before you've put it in your mouth. You want it to look right, you want it to feel right with cutlery or your fingers. So, from that sort of visceral quality, that's going to be a hard one to nail.
It is, and it's what we eat isn't a slop. It isn't a soup. If you cut into a piece of steak, there will be a bit which is more fatty. There will be bits on the side which are more charred. That heterogeneity is not some homogeneous blob. That's really important, and so I really hope that these cultivated meat lab technicians have a lot of chefs like yourself in there saying, no, 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 this is what people really care about and what's really important, and it's important that they nail that.
Mm-mm. And have you tried any? Have you looked into this at all? We're volunteering. By the way, Harry, we should volunteer our services to do some taste tests.
Oh, 100%. I would be front of the line. In fact, I am actually hoping to track down this dog food to try it myself, just to say that I'm the first person in the UK who has eaten commercially available cultivated meat, even if it's not meant for the human breeds.
I really don't know what to say, Harry, but I applaud your commitment to the cause. This is just, if anyone's cringing out there, yeah, I'm with you. But yes, please do report back to help the rest of us out with what it tastes like, and also what our animals, our pets, will be eating at home as well. This is brilliant.
It's either that or it's a trip to Singapore. I think one might be cheaper than the other.
Yes, it would be. Well, if Singapore wants to invite you, I think there's a potential important investigative tour like lined up right there for you. Well, look, right.
In Singapore.
DMs are open, Singapore. I love it. Now we put it out there. Um, Look, based on what you've seen and heard, because you are doing a lot of talking about this, and we're resistant to certain kinds of food products, right? Insects are another really good example of that. It's eaten in 150 countries around the world, but it does have this ick factor or yuck factor. How ready are we? Do you think we're ready in 2 years' time to be putting this on our plates? Is it commercially viable? I mean, what do you think?
I I think there's going to be a lot of people who are squeamish. But I think, unlike the food where there is a compromise, where you go, I can barely tell the difference between this alternative protein and this genuine one. If they can win on a different element, on whether that's on taste, whether that's on health, I think that will win people over. It's going to be hard to say, look, this meat is more environmentally friendly. This meat is kinder on animals potentially. If you can say, this is the meat which tastes amazing, it's half the price, and it helps you live forever, well, then I think people will be pretty quick to flock.
Well, and it does boil down so much to marketing, doesn't it? Because one of the big challenges for products like this and just novel technologies generally is disinformation, misinformation, and this idea that it's replacing, it's not replacing animals, it's just providing an alternative to what is already out there that's actually not great. Isn't that the case here?
I think so. But I would say, we already eat Marmite. Marmite
Mm.
is a bunch of cells which is grown in a tank, which are multiplying there, that science has produced, that we take out and we put into a slot. Now, that's not very appealing to 50% of the population, but we've broken the seal, I think. This is something that we're used to, and potentially, if they can market it just right, maybe borrow from Marmite, then providing that the lobbying doesn't counteract it, then I could definitely see this hitting our shelves in 2028.
We've talked about chicken, we've talked about beefy, non-beef steaks, if that makes sense. But what about other products?
The options here are potentially unlimited. Not only have we got meat products, but we've got other animal products. So milk, eggs, particularly things like egg white, might be easier because they don't have the texture problems. And if we can cultivate those, if we can cultivate milk without having to rely on destroying rainforests by or using a lot of water to make almond milk or soya milk, that could be very promising. And there's even people working on cultivated sugars, whole new sugars, which might be healthier for us. They don't require massive plantations of sugar and could ultimately have similar benefits to meat. So watch this space and don't just look at meat. Meat's potentially the hardest one with the biggest prizes, but there will be other cultivated foods out there.
I mean, the world is really a cultivated oyster, isn't it? Here, there's so much to think about. Gosh, well, we can't wait. Final thought, Harry, should we be eating cultivated meat and giving it a try when it's out in the market?
If we can reduce the impact of meat on the environment, if we can reduce animals suffering, and if we can have a tasty burger guilt-free, then yes, I think we are almost morally obligated to try cultivated meat.
Harry, you've been absolutely fantastic. No surprises there. I have enjoyed interviewing you in the past, and I knew you'd be brilliant. So we're watching this space. Thank you very much for sharing your expert thoughts.
Thank you so much, and looking forward to the rest of the episodes.